Buenas tardes. En nombre de Casa África, del director general, Luis Padrón, que me ha pedido que disculpe su ausencia, está en Madrid, donde va a tener unas reuniones mañana con el Ministerio, y también estamos recibiendo a un comisario de la CDAO, que viene también a Las Palmas. En nombre del consorcio les doy la bienvenida, les agradezco que estén hoy aquí con nosotros. Muy brevemente les explico, como algunos de ustedes ya conocen, el formato de esta actividad. Esta actividad es un diálogo, charla, entrevista dentro del programa África es noticia, que es un programa dentro de nuestro ámbito de diplomacia pública, uno de los ámbitos en los que trabajamos en el consorcio. Y hoy tenemos esta charla, va a estar moderada o realizada en formato de entrevista en torno a la figura del embajador Lulama Smuts Ngonyama. Es el embajador de Sudáfica en España y está en Las Palmas en este momento, está haciendo una gira de despedida por los lugares de España donde tienen un interés especial en mantener unas relaciones pues, con el tejido cultural, universitario y sobre todo empresarial, y está haciendo una gira por toda España porque ya va a terminar su destino en España ya el próximo mes de diciembre. Él es embajador, ha sido embajador desde el año 2014. Tenemos una relación magnífica tanto con el actual embajador como con su antecesora, que también nos visitó en bastantes ocasiones. Y hoy está el embajador aquí, ha aceptado estar con nosotros en su visita a Canarias para aprovechar su conocimiento, su experiencia como activista político del ANC, del African National Congress, el CNA en español. Él fue un alto dirigente del partido político, del movimiento político en el que militó Nelson Mandela. Llegó a ser, aparte de directivo regional y local, llegó a ser el portavoz nacional del partido y ha vivido muy de cerca sobre todo la fase del final del apartheid y de las políticas de reconciliación. Él ha sido también parte muy activa de la creación de esas políticas dentro de un núcleo del partido en el que está el actual presidente con el que él tiene una relación muy estrecha. Entonces vamos a aprovechar que está aquí con nosotros para que esa experiencia que tiene la comparta con nosotros de la mano de nuestro conocidísimo colaborador Antonio Lozano. Para el quien todavía pueda no conocerlo, pues Antonio Lozano es un escritor experto en literatura africana, autor de muchas obras de literatura, de novela negra, de ambiente africano y también lo más reciente que ha publicado Antonio es una biografía novelada de Nelson Mandela, un encargo de una editorial para difundir la obra y la figura de Nelson Mandela entre la gente joven. Es una obra, en teoría, de enfoque juvenil, pero que también se lee muy bien, la pueden leer como adultos perfectamente y les encantará. Antonio va a moderar esta charla en formato de entrevista con una serie de preguntas que están preparadas. Y yo creo que, si no se me olvida nada, bueno, es lo que les decía, África es noticia. Sigan ustedes con nuestro newsletter este programa nuestro, porque intentamos traer a personas o bien que están de paso por aquí, como es el caso, o bien las traemos expresamente, personas que tengan algo que decir importante sobre lo que está ocurriendo ahora en África y que lo podamos discutir en profundidad con ellos aquí en Casa África. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador Lulama. Thank you for being here with us tonight. We wish you the best after you finish your post in Madrid. All the best in South Africa. Thank you and all the best in the Canary Islands as well. Thank you. Buenas noches. Gracias.
Bueno, muy buenas noches a todos y a todas. Muchísimas gracias a Casa África por darme la oportunidad de participar en este encuentro, que sin duda va a ser para mí, para todos nosotros, muy enriquecedor. Muchísimas gracias al señor Lulama, al señor embajador, por haber elegido Las Palmas de Gran Canaria como una de las ciudades en las que se hace esta gira de despedida y bueno, aprovechamos para desearle mucha suerte en su regreso a Sudáfrica y en su futuro. El nombre de esta charla, esta entrevista es Pasado, Presente y Futuro de la República Sudafricana, de Sudáfrica, y de eso vamos a hablar, empezando por el pasado. Y en primer lugar, quería preguntarle, usted nació en un momento en el que el apartheid estaba en su apogeo. Pasó bajo este infame sistema jurídico y político, pasó una parte muy importante de su vida, toda su infancia, en fin. Es pues un testigo de excepción de aquella época. Y en primer lugar, antes de adentrarnos en el presente y en el futuro de la República Sudafricana, nos gustaría que nos ilustre sobre la vida diaria, las condiciones cotidianas en que vivía la población negra y también la población india y la población mestiza, en fin, la población no blanca. Entonces, como testigo de aquellos años, nos gustaría que nos explicara un poco cómo funcionaba aquello del apartheid.
Well, thank you very much, Antonio, for your kind words. Initially, I would like to say that it's a great honor for me to be here and to have an opportunity to have this dialogue with you, and as a renowned writer and a scholar. It's a great honor for me and for my country. Now, on the issue relating to me personally and my childhood, how I grew up within the context of apartheid, those were very difficult times in South Africa. And difficult in the sense that we're living in a situation where the society was actually categorized into three categories. The white people were actually regarded as the first-class citizens of the country. And then you had the Indians and the so-called colored community were regarded as second-class citizens. Then you had the Africans, they were regarded as third-class citizens. And how would they actually sort of authenticate this? And they would actually do many things, and even they look at the texture of the hair and of the individual. And they look at the color, the fairness, or the darkness of the pigmentation of the individual. And then they would actually categorize you, and within those three categories. How would they even look at the texture? They would even take a pen or a pencil and push it through your hair. And if the pen remains, it means that you are an African, and therefore you must be part and parcel of the third-class citizen. And then if your skin, perhaps, or your pigmentation is somehow fairer, then they would also mixed up with a bit of loose hair. Then you would actually be categorized as the second-class citizens. You would qualify to be the so-called colored or an Indian and a person. And then the first class was very obvious because of the texture of the hair and also the pigmentation. then that goes with the various rights, and that would be, and within, as actually within the constitution of the country. And then if you belong to the first class and you have all the rights, you can study at any university and any course. And you have all the privileges of the government. You get full protection of the government because you are regarded as a super and a human being, a real human being. Then the second class and kind of would be discriminated because they don't qualify to become the real first class. And therefore they would actually be given a bit of privileges here and there, like for instance, and there are certain courses that you'd be allowed to study, and maybe even artisanships, and be allowed to go to certain maybe institutions. But the third class citizen, it was difficult even to become a bricklayer, for instance, because your responsibility is to become a worker. And therefore, you are not supposed to have any skill. And if I were to actually take that practically, as a reformation that was happening in the country, Antonio, then there was, because now there was starting to be a shortage of skills. So there was lineage and that was given, or some kind of an opening that was given, and some institutions, and they were to be created so that now even those that are third class must study some of the courses. And therefore there was one institution that I know that was opened, and so that we could study diploma in civil engineering and diploma in health studies and health practitioners, and as well as land surveyors and so on and so forth. Practically from myself, Antonio, and I wanted to become a civil engineer in life, and but I had to go to this college, which was the only one, and it was, I'm coming from the south of South Africa, but the eastern and part of South Africa, Port Elizabeth, or Nelson Mandela Bay, where Alicia and myself are actually coming from. Then I had to go to that one college, which was more or less in the north part of South Africa, because that was the only college that was set up, and to start to giving us some skills to get into civil engineering and land surveying. And unfortunately, and when I arrived, I could not be admitted within the civil engineering and the faculty because it was full. There were many people that wanted, so I ended up getting into land surveying, but I couldn't finish my course. And in 1976, you'd remember that was the burning time in South Africa because it was the time of the so-called Soweto uprisings. And at that time, I was doing this diploma in land surveying. And I was actually, because I became part and parcel of the student leadership. And most of us were expelled. I was amongst those that were expelled from the college. And then I left. I could not finish my diploma in land surveying. And at the time, of course, I was doing my last year in theory, I was getting into the practical side. So I had to give up completely land surveying, and I started a different direction altogether. I'm just trying to paint a bit of a picture. Apartheid was very, very complicated, and good people, very complicated because it was an institutionalized racism. It was in everything, and therefore it's difficult to explain and in detail, but that's how the life in South Africa was. In fact, it was based, because apartheid was actually was coming from the Bible. And the architects of apartheid, like Vervoet, they were quoting the Bible that, the Bible says that, and God says, those that are in the positions of leadership must be respected. And therefore, the government of the day was apartheid government, and they had to use it very strongly and indoctrinate. In fact, some of the leaders, like Vervoet himself, who is regarded as the apartheid architect, studied in Netherlands. And so he was actually learning, and that kind of Christian indoctrination, and which was based on which they actually premised and apartheid. And some universities, by the way, and like one of the universities in South Africa called Potchefstroom, and various others were actually indoctrinating this, and therefore even younger leaders that were coming from those universities, now white in particular, they were actually imbibed with this. And so that's why apartheid had to be strong, because it was indoctrinated from the university, and it became part and parcel of life and of many, many people. And black people in general, and both Africans and Indians and colored people had to understand this, that they are inferior and the people, and as based in the Bible and based in various other theoretical indoctrinations. I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
Sí, por supuesto. Muchas gracias, Lulama. El Congreso Nacional Africano tuvo grandes líderes que ya estaban ahí cuando se incorporó Mandela al CNA año después, algunos años después, unos pocos años después de llegar a Johannesburgo. Estaban Oliver Tambo, Albert Luthuli, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, que fue el padre de Thabo Mbeki, que sucedería a Mandela en la presidencia del país. Todos ellos eran muy admirados por Nelson Mandela y eran grandes referentes para él en su lucha contra el apartheid. Pero, ¿qué aportó Nelson Mandela con su incorporación al Congreso Nacional Africano? ¿Qué le hizo capaz de asumir el liderazgo del partido entre todos esos grandes nombres, de seguir luchando a pesar de las penalidades de la cárcel, de las penalidades a las que fue sometida su familia, y hasta llevar hasta el fin del proceso de transformación que llevó a la abolición del apartheid? ¿Cómo pudo? ¿Qué hizo Mandela para convertirse en ese gran líder?
Difficult question, Antonio. But be that as it may, I agree entirely with you. It is precisely because of those leaders that you've referred to that Nelson Mandela, that created the seedbed from which Nelson Mandela germinated. Nelson Mandela came from a very strong breed of leaders before him. And not only those leaders of the ANC, there were also traditional leaders. If you go through his book and Long Walk to Freedom, where he explains how he grew up, and he actually explains that it's actually based on the way he grew up within the village, where there was a time when he was young, and after the death of his father, then he was taken to his uncle, Mtikaka, who was a chief, and his father was a chief. Then he would actually be invited by Chief Mtikaka and his cousins to sit, and when there are cases of the village that that Chief Mtikaga had to preside over. And Nelson Mandela as a child would actually be sitting there and listening and watching, and the chief presiding over, and the people of the village if there was a particular case. And within the African context in general, whether you talk about South or North of Africa, and there are times then, and even now when it comes to villages, where people would come together. It's called in my country imbizo, where they come together, and when there's a serious problem, and then the chief would sit there with his council and consult with the village and listen to the village and explaining or maybe putting forward whatever and the suggestions. So Nelson Mandela grew up and he appreciated this kind of leadership of consultation until finally, and to cut the long story short, he became older and he left the village. He went over to Johannesburg after his studies. Now, when he arrived in Johannesburg, he was actually invited. He met people like Walter Sisulu. Actually, it's Walter Sisulu who recruited him and to join the ANC. You know that, Antonio, yourself. Now, Walter Sisulu became this quiet person, but very supportive of Nelson Mandela because they were identifying him as a very energetic, very strong person. At the same time, Nelson Mandela was looking upon them as leaders, and Walter Sisulu and Govan Begi and Albert Luthuli and others. And people like J.B. Marx and Dr. Dadu and others, and the great leaders and across the board in the country. And Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo, they were relatively younger but very active and with them. And he was making many mistakes, by the way, because they were very energetic, himself and others, very energetic because they were impatient about what was happening in the country, Antonio. Mm-hmm. And now he's surrounded by these great leaders that would actually admonish him on certain occasions to say that no, and tranquil, and despacio, move slowly, please. And but he would listen. He allowed himself to be corrected. And the other big thing about him that myself having worked with him and was a character of consulting. He was consulting a lot, and I think that's what he picked up from his home village, from the chief, to learn to listen to different views of the people and respect the views of the people. But at the same time, he learned to be highly principled, and from these other elders of the organization who were prepared to die, and some of them actually died, and in front of him, some of them were executed. And whilst he was leading, and he saw that these people were ready to die, and at the same time, they were not prepared to give up. So Nelson Mandela became an embodiment of all those contributions, and listening to people, consulting a lot, and also very, very disciplined and a person, I must say, strict about time. And when you get into meetings, if Mandela says that, former President Mandela says that the meeting starts at 10 o'clock, it's starting at 10 o'clock. And otherwise, if you come late, definitely, and you will definitely be called to order. And so we learned within that kind of leadership from him. That is the kind of a leader that he was. And he respected people. And he had deep, deep love of people, irrespective of the color of the skin of the individual, irrespective of the gender of the individual. That is why Nelson Mandela would say, I am prepared to die if the white people dominate the African people or the black people in general and oppress and discriminate them, subjugate them. And he says, I'm also prepared to die if the black people in general dominate and subjugate because of their numbers, the white people. So that's the kind of a person that he was, Nelson Mandela. And he had this strong belief in him on broad humanity and the equality of humanity. And nobody was going to shake him from those principles. He was very, very strong and highly disciplined. And he had clarity of vision that this is the direction that we have to take. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Lulama. En 1994 llegan las elecciones y la conocida victoria del Congreso Nacional Africano, la primera vez en la historia del país en que pueden los africanos votar, el primer presidente africano del país, y empieza el desmantelamiento del edificio jurídico que mantenía el apartheid. Se aprueba una nueva constitución. Usted en esa época ya se encuentra integrado en los niveles de mando del partido, del Congreso Nacional Africano. Desde esa posición privilegiada que usted tenía, Lulama, ¿qué nos puede decir de la labor de Madiba como presidente? Lo que hizo y lo que a su pesar no pudo hacer, pero le hubiera gustado poder hacer. Él mismo ya había avisado a la población de que en 5 años no iba a poder arreglar el país, que había muchas cosas que cambiar, el trabajo era enorme y los recursos eran escasos, que había que tener mucho tiempo y mucha paciencia. Entonces, ¿cómo vio usted la labor de Mandela como presidente? Sus satisfacciones, sus desengaños, sus errores también, sus logros.
Well, Antonio, that was a very difficult time in the history of South Africa again. Because here is Nelson Mandela coming out of prison. And people have got high hopes that after Nelson Mandela has been released, things are going to change for the better. And yet Nelson Mandela is released, still apartheid intact. And first thing that Nelson Mandela does is to say that the nation has to be united. He talks about the unity of the nation. He talks about the need to build a non-racial democratic South Africa, and that comes from him. He talks about people that put down your arms, take your AK-47s, take your whatever weapon that we're using and throw it to the sea. That's what he says. Big shock to many people because at the time, the apartheid government is still intact. The army of the apartheid is still intact. And Nelson Mandela is saying that put down your arms. Now people trust him because it's Nelson Mandela that has gone through the sacrifice, and Nelson Mandela and who was prepared to die. That's one. Total commitment from the people to the leadership. Secondly, and Nelson Mandela is not only speaking to those that are oppressed. He says, our country has to be liberated. Those who were oppressed must be liberated. He says, even those who were oppressing must be liberated because they are not. And in full security, they are not even liberated themselves, and especially the majority in the country. And people listen to Nelson Mandela. both sides. And there's maybe a small group of the far right that becomes very strong and adamant and say that we're not prepared to be governed. We're not prepared to sit down and talk with the ANC, a group of terrorists and other liberation movements and black people who we believe are subhumans. Nelson Mandela, out of patience, as you say, he continues to talk to all of us. He continues to address various gatherings of the nation. And there's a very strong semblance of South Africans, and needless to talk about the black people that were oppressed, but also now from those who were regarded as the privileged. Scholars, a group of scholars and a group of business people listen to Nelson Mandela. They make a very strong call in support of Nelson Mandela. And eventually, we go for negotiations. And of course, we must actually give credit to the leadership of F.W. de Klerk, who was the president of the apartheid government at the time, because he took a bold decision of releasing Nelson Mandela and other leaders, and then agreed to going for negotiations. And during negotiations, you are right, I was part and parcel of the negotiations myself. And during the negotiations, framework is set up and of moving forward with negotiations and various steps, an agreement that these negotiations must be driven by South Africans themselves and not rely or maybe bring people from outside who do not understand our challenges in the country. Because the uniqueness of the South African situation is that the oppressor and the oppressed were living in the same country. And generally, the oppression or the colonization, the way we know it, is that the colonizers live somewhere else, and the colonizers and the colonized live in another country. But in South Africa, the colonized and the colonizer were living in the same place, and therefore we needed to come together and create our own negotiations. We did that. And we agreed on the process, painful as it was, and many things happened, as you rightly pointing out. Many things happened. Many people were being killed at the time, but finally there was an agreement that there must be an interim constitution that will take us to elections. We agree on the interim constitution, and mind that interim constitution, Antonio, takes place whilst the apartheid government is still intact. And therefore it was the apartheid government, parliament, that had to approve the interim constitution and the bill that was taking us now to elections in 1994. And there was an agreement and it was accepted, it was passed, because that was the agreement of the negotiations. Then from there, that was the first interim constitution that was passed in 1993. Then we went to elections in 1994. Nelson Mandela, and from there set up the government. And the government that he set up, he put a government of national unity. He says, first thing that we need to do, we need the old government to be part and parcel of this government. That is why the former president during apartheid, F.W. de Klerk, was part and parcel of the government of national unity. And even in the ministries, the first minister of finance in South Africa was Derek Keyes, and he was coming from the privilege, and various other ministries. So we had to put that government of national unity and even take the first minister of Home Affairs was Minister Chief Gasha Buthelezi, who was coming from Inkatha Freedom Party, and then also ANC and leaders. So that's what Nelson Mandela managed to do. He actually led us through that in a very meticulous way, and making us believe that we need to be focused in this, mind even at that time, because many people were still saying that I've lost my brother. I can't see, I don't know what happened to my father. I don't know what happened to my sister, and therefore I'm still not accepting this. Then Nelson Mandela put up the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation and the Commission, and said that everybody who have got issues must go to the TRC that was led by Bishop Desmond Tutu and Dr. Alex Borain and various other leaders to actually clean up so that people talk and all their pains, and those that were killing people, they must go there and tell how many people they killed and so on and so forth. So that's what happened, really. I'm not sure if I've met your expectations on this question. Thank you, sir.
Sí, por supuesto. Bueno, en 1999 termina el mandato presidencial de Nelson Mandela y accede al poder Thabo Mbeki, que fue vicepresidente de Nelson Mandela. Fue un miembro antiguo del CNA desde los 14 años, sufrió prisión y exilio como consecuencia de su lucha contra el apartheid y no pudo regresar al país hasta la liberación de Nelson Mandela. Sin embargo, en su etapa como presidente, cuando fue elegido en el año en que fue reelegido en 2004, es decir, su primera etapa después de Mandela, y en su reelección en el 2004, está aparentemente llena de sombras, al menos en la imagen que nos transmitían en aquella época los medios de comunicación occidentales, europeos. Había acusaciones de corrupción, había acusaciones de una visión errónea sobre la lucha contra el SIDA, acusaciones de que nada cambiaba en Sudáfrica, que la población negra en su gran mayoría seguía viviendo en la misma situación que en la época del apartheid, la situación de pobreza, que las mayores riquezas seguían en manos de los blancos. Había luchas internas en el partido, con su enfrentamiento con Jacob Zuma, que era su vicepresidente. Y ¿nos podría usted hacer un poco de luz sobre esos años, sobre lo que ocurrió de verdad, sobre la veracidad o no de esas acusaciones? ¿Qué ocurrió en realidad en la era Mbeki, en la que parecía que el legado de Mandela y el legado del Congreso Nacional Africano se perdía, que el país se estancaba y que las clases más desfavorecidas no lograban salir de su situación? ¿Qué hay de verdad en todo aquello? ¿Qué ocurrió en esa época?
Okay. Yes, no, definitely. There was a number of perceptions and that were out there. It was a time of excitement, I must actually say, Antonio. Thabo Mbeki's time was the time of excitement in South Africa because economic growth was at its highest point during his time. And the African National Congress, and during his time, because he was very popular and very strong, because he worked with Madiba, Nelson Mandela, and he was highly trusted, and he was known as a person, Madiba was focusing on the nation building and uniting the nation, and Thabo Mbeki, being the deputy, is the one that was actually consolidating the government and actually driving the policies. So there was so much confidence in him, besides the fact that he was well respected as a scholar and of economics, and so at the economic level, and he was highly respected. So we had challenges. The expectations of people was actually starting to be much stronger during his time. Mind, during the time of Nelson Mandela, it was a time of nation building. And Nelson Mandela introduced with Thabo Mbeki, introduced the social grants for old people, as well as the food for young people at schools. And something that were not there before. And the 3.5 to 5 million young people were being fed in all schools, getting through the feeding scheme. And there was equalization of the social security grants and to all old people, irrespective of the color of the skin. Mbeki was strong on the transformation agenda. He became very, very strong on matters of discipline, and very much against the perception that was actually being put across. He was very strong on discipline. That is why even now, after he left the office, there's not even one charge that has been leveled against him, even now in South Africa and in all positions that he held. And strict on economy, introduced because we had a high deficit, and especially we were owing banks from outside the country. From apartheid, because before 1994 we had negative growth in the country. And apartheid government loaded up the debt. So the economy was quite heavy, difficult. And Madiba relied on Thabo Mbeki to actually come up with strategies together with him. And that's why we had a wonderful transition first period. Then second, when Thabo Mbeki came, he introduced very strong fiscal discipline. And even himself as an individual, he cut down on the increment that he would get as a president. So that's a kind of a person. I'm trying to sketch the character of the leadership of Thabo Mbeki. And the ANC got, and that's why it got 2/3 majority for the first time under his leadership, because the nation was hoping and the nation was pumping. However, we had a challenge within the organization, because some were not happy about the policies of and a strict fiscal discipline, which came through what the policy that was called GIE, in short, the acronym. It's growth, employment, and redistribution, which is a macroeconomic framework. And then there was a very strong debate within the organization between the left, those who are in the left, and within the same organization, and those who are the main core of the African National Congress, and or maybe what you would say the center left, because ANC at the time is comprised of the alliance. You have the African National Congress itself, then you have the South African Communist Party, then you have the Congress of the South African Trade Unions, and then you have the South African Civic Society. And these other three, or maybe two of them, the Workers' Congress of South African Trade Unions, as well as the SACP, were strong against the GIE and this fiscal discipline that Thabo Mbeki was introducing. Because they were saying that people are very poor and therefore the government must spend. And the government and the ANC in particular was saying, yes, we will spend, but we have to deal with the debt that the country owes. Otherwise, we'll continue to go to World Bank and IMF. So we introduced, as a country, strict discipline to ourselves. They were not introduced by IMF and World Bank. They were introduced by the government itself. And we managed to go through that. And then thereafter, things started to flow. You remember that we had the very big housing program called RDP, and South Africa got the UN award for this giving out houses to millions of people free of charge, and that is still happening because of the homelessness of so many people in the country. It was during the time of Thabo Mbeki. But President Thabo Mbeki And he's a questioning president. He's a kind of a person that would question on the AIDS issue, for instance, which is so much, as you rightly pointing out, Antonio, that there was so much about it. President Mbeki, his main call was that we cannot take money and buy the drugs when we have high levels of poverty. If you feed people with drugs in an empty stomach, that is actually leading those people to grave very quickly. And his idea was that we have to ensure that we boost the immune system of the people by ensuring that we cut down very strongly the poverty levels of the country, simultaneously buy the drugs. But you can't take the whole budget of the health and buy the drugs. That did not go very well. And as it doesn't go very well with the pharmaceutical companies, multinationals, doesn't go very well. And we know that. All of us know that. Pharmaceutical companies want their drugs to be bought. And that's what actually made Thabo Mbeki to be unpopular. And of course, there was so much in the media about that, but there was strong support of him and from the masses of the people because they understood what he was trying to do. And then, within the organization, there was this and a pull from the so-called left that please spend, spend, spend. And the tension grew up much stronger. And Thabo Mbeki was removed even before the end of his term. But now, Antonio, if you go to South Africa, you can see the most respected leader as we speak is Thabo Mbeki. If Thabo Mbeki goes anywhere to speak, the whole nation listens because they say that is the man and that was leading us in the right direction. And unfortunately, he's not a populist. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, en mayo de 2009 accede Jacob Zuma al poder, donde permanece hasta el mes de febrero de este año, expulsado por su propio partido, por el Congreso Nacional Africano, ¿no? Esa sí parece ser una época oscura de la historia actual del país, por las prácticas corruptas. La mediadora de la República, Thuli Madonsela, cuya función consiste en limitar los excesos, las derivas del poder, habla de esta época como una década perdida para Sudáfrica. Ya antes Zuma había tenido problemas con la justicia, pero todo ello no le impidió ser elegido presidente del Congreso Nacional Africano en 2007 y convertirse en candidato y posteriormente en presidente en el año 2009, a pesar de las numerosas acusaciones sobre él por corrupción, fraude y blanqueo de dinero. Es conocido durante su mandato su alianza con el imperio económico de la familia Gupta, que por cierto en estos días parece que hay una próxima propuesta de extradición de los hermanos de los Emiratos Árabes, de Dubái hacia Sudáfrica, que se convirtió esa relación con los Gupta se convirtió en el eje principal de sus prácticas corruptas. Bueno, como decía, en febrero de este año el Congreso Nacional Africano exigía a Zuma abandonar inmediatamente el poder, a lo que él se opuso sin éxito. ¿Qué hay de cierto? ¿Qué nos puede decir sobre esto? Y sobre todo, ¿qué ocurrió para que el Congreso Nacional Africano eligiera una persona como Jacob Zuma como presidente del partido y como candidato a la presidencia del país?
Hi, Antonio now is putting me on the spot. Yes. President Zuma comes from the history of the ANC. He was trusted by everybody. And he has a long stripes of struggle and suffered a lot. He was in Robben Island, even went to exile, trusted by the people. And definitely, he actually moved in. And unfortunately, and because of the tensions that you referred to, Antonio, correctly, and because of the pressure that was applied to remove and President Beki to bring in and President Zuma, there was so much hope. You know, in the history of any nation, there are moments and of darkness where you think that you are actually moving in the right direction. Out of desperation, you take certain decisions. And that is now removal of President Beki before the end of his term. And it was those dark moments in the history because it actually made the country and to be very, very morose. And President Zuma had to come in because he was a deputy. But because of the so-called tensions that were built, not necessarily by him, by certain sectors within our society and against President Beki, and himself and being this person that is seen to be a better person that is going to bring big changes and is going to be much lenient on many things than this President Beki, and is going to be open on matters of whatever. Now, so President Zuma comes in within that image. A good person, President Zuma. A good person on human and their relations. And he moves in. And as he moves on, expectations grow. And unfortunately, because he's an open person, some people that we refer to taken advantage of that. The Gupta family that we refer to. And today in South Africa, you'd actually go through literature and maybe narrations in the media. They talk about the state capture. There's a term referring to the state capture, that the state is captured by and certain and the groupings, and the Gupta's family being such a family, and perhaps others as well. Because there was patronage, strong patronage, which came to fore. And on many occasions, it was clear that President Zuma was not even aware of what was happening on many occasions. But these people were using his name, and because of their proximity, when the president allows you to come and you talk, then and they bring other people, and I come and greet Antonio. Antonio is my friend, and so on. And other people see that, oh, this ambassador or this Smuts Ngonyama Lulama is a friend to Antonio, and Antonio is very influential figure. Then, using that myself, then I garner so much from the people, and people give me so much. And I even manipulate state institutions, because everybody now is scared because they see me very close to the president. That's what happened with the Guptas. And so many things happened and that are so unpalatable. So unpalatable. High level of corruption. And I must say. And that was uncovered. But fortunately, because we're very strong in the system of government and institutions, it was not going to last in South Africa because we have set up a number of institutions. And these people got into the clutches. They were identified, and some ran away, and we believe some of them are now in Dubai. They stay in Dubai. They are not in South Africa. They ran away, and so on and so forth. Others are now, there's a commission, and that has been established by the government so that anybody who has got information about anybody that stole the money of the government anywhere goes to that commission. It's called the Zondo Commission. It's led by Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice Zondo of the country, and who is actually weeding out these individuals, and some of them are actually going to jail. So that's exactly what happened. And during, unfortunately, this era, and it was unfortunate because President Zuma, and I still maintain, he's not an angel because there's nobody who's an angel. And he had his own mistakes, but many people actually utilized him for their own benefit. And it's a very difficult time in the history of my country. But fortunately, as I say, the institutions of democracy in South Africa are very, very strong. The constitution that we put together is a constitution that is not going to allow anybody to actually go haywire and on matters of corruption and not be detected. And that is why now the wheels are moving very strongly and stronger than before. The economy is now growing. If you look at the Fitch and the Standard & Poor ratings, they are actually they've rated South Africa and on the positive light as an investment destination. Anything else that I've missed? It was a big question.
No.
And difficult at...
No. Muchas gracias por contestar.
Okay, good.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a hacer una última pregunta para que el público tenga también la oportunidad de preguntar, porque no quisiera terminar sin hablar del presente y del presente más próximo y del futuro, es decir, de la persona que sucede a Jacob Zuma, que es Cyril Ramaphosa, el presidente actual. Es un importante empresario, miembro del Congreso Nacional Africano desde hace tiempo, antiguo sindicalista. A pesar de que planean algunas sombras sobre él, empieza una era en la que todos, dentro y fuera del país, esperamos que sea de recuperación de la honestidad en la práctica política, la de la recuperación del legado de Nelson Mandela, la recuperación también de los principios del Congreso Nacional Africano, en definitiva, la del nuevo camino para ese gran país que es la República Sudafricana. ¿Cree usted que podemos esperar eso? ¿Que los primeros pasos del presidente Ramaphosa van en ese camino, en esa línea?
Antonio, we are now in the process of actually building our country, continue on the path of growth, positive economic and political environment, and of course, I mean, there's nobody who's an angel. As I said, so even with Mbeki, he was not an angel, he was full of his own mistakes. And Madiba himself, he used to say so that, please, never think that I'm an angel, I can make mistakes, I've made so many mistakes. And so we must also view the current president within that light. However, we are in a very, very strong state of moving forward. Because, and of what I've referred to, what was a dark shade with regard to the so-called Gupta family that was stealing and various other elements, they are being weeded out. So now we are in a situation where the environment in the country, nobody thinks of doing anything and not be seen or identified. That gives assurance. And various other measures are being put together. And like, for instance, National Development Plan, and which is a long-term vision, the economic vision of the country, and which assures us that we are on the growth path economically. And there's total commitment from everybody that the mistakes that we've seen, that because there was so much confidence in people and trusting everybody, now people are saying that we must be much more vigilant than ever before. That's one good thing about mistakes that happen. And people learn out of the mistakes. And I think that the nation has actually learned out of the past mistakes. And President Ramaphosa comes in within that environment. And he comes in as somebody that has worked with, who has been part and parcel of the leadership of the ANC, and worked with Nelson Mandela. He was part and parcel of the team that drafted the constitution of the country. So he's a trusted person, and he's a business person of note, and himself, so he has got so much experience in building the economy, and a charismatic leader, loving and leader to people and listening to people. And if you listen to his slogans even now and the messages that he's putting forward, he actually pumps hope to the nation, and the nation is now much stronger in moving forward, definitely. And Antonio, I can actually say to you that South Africa is much stronger now than ever before, and we are definitely going to be much stronger. And if you look at even the positions that we take within the continent, and because the SADC region is now one common market region, and Africa in general is moving towards that, to create one market for the whole of the African continent. And things are moving quite well. Our economy is actually moving. And if you look at we had challenges despite the big tariffs and sanctions that are being pumped left, right, and center from the big powers of the world. But small and relatively medium economies like South Africa are holding and very strongly. If you look even at our exchange rate, and it was experiencing problems, it's strong now, and the economic growth is moving. We are going to have a conference now in October, between the 21st to the 25th of October, convened by President Ramaphosa. He has set a target of 100 billion euros, and to actually set up this coffer to unleash and on the infrastructure, and also on training and education, job creation in general, and cut down levels of poverty within the country. We are really on the growth path, not only in South Africa, but also in the SADC region. And so we are certain, we are there, we are very strong. Thank you very much.
Nos alegramos de todo corazón, nos alegramos mucho de que estén en ese camino. Muchas gracias, y vamos a pasarle la palabra al público, Lulama, si le parece. Si alguien quiere... Muchas gracias. ¿Alguna pregunta? Sí.
Okay, so thank you very much for the interview. It was very interesting. And my question is about how do you see the role of South Africa within the continent, in terms of leading the continent to higher development in the next couple of decades. And I have another question, which is how do you see the influence of China in the African context? Do you think it will be positive for the continent?
Thank you. Okay. Well, the South Africa is definitely one of the most important countries and within African continent. However, we are very careful and of actually imbibing to ourselves a big brother approach. And we believe that we cannot be regarded as a behemoth, and we must be and amongst various other players within the continent. So that is our approach as the country. And you'd notice that even why we came very strongly on matters of peer review mechanism, and because Africa, for instance, is not credited about that, by the way, that it introduced peer review mechanism where, and the African Union has got this instrument of actually letting all countries and to come forward and evaluate themselves in terms of democracy, in terms of justice, in terms of social and economic emancipation and delivery to the people, and good governance in particular. And there is such mechanism that has been introduced. South Africa was very strong on that because, and we felt that all of us must be equal and all of us must be strong on this. We must not look forward to and maybe and the other institutions from outside to impose on Africa what Africa must do. Africa must impose certain institutions to itself so that it monitors and ensures good governance. Generally, and that's how we believe, that we can only move together as this locomotive of the African continent if we move all of us together. Certainly South Africa is one of those and the countries that accept the responsibility to push forward the continent and consolidate the continent. But we are not taking a big brother approach. On China, China is, we regard it as any other country that is interested in investing. Foreign direct investment is what we need and in the continent. And therefore China is playing a good role in that. And they giving out loans, they also investing in infrastructure. However, the issue is there cannot be a situation where any country that comes in must be accepted to set the agenda. Otherwise, we'll be actually moving towards the colonization again. We can't allow ourselves as the African countries to be colonized and by any other country again, even China, because of the needs and desperation that the countries have. At some point, for instance, President Begi, Antonio, in the National Executive Committee of my party, and we're debating very strongly this issue. Because at the time there was the issue of Taiwan, and the two-China debate. Then there was total acceptance that, okay, and China is the main. And however, we must get into the ring and set the agenda together. Our agenda must not be set by China. We must, and China, fortunately, I've listened to, and President Xi Jinping, he has been saying that even himself. So it's very, very important that we always keep that in mind, I know that there's so much that is being said in the media and also coming also from the continent of Africa and different views on this matter. But we need foreign direct investment. And China is bringing that foreign direct investment. But we must ensure that the agenda is being set by the countries in Africa. I'm not sure. Thank you.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Sí. Después. Bueno. La señora.
Just one question. How do you see, in actuality, the role of the Nelson Mandela Foundation? What role is it playing in the present moment?
Nelson Mandela Foundation is one of the most important civil society organizations, and it's participating on matters relating to health. You'd know that Madiba himself, before he passed on, he had this very strong vision of establishing a hospital purely for children. And he said that he wants this hospital to be a world-class hospital. So he moved up and down the world to do fundraising for this hospital, and unfortunately, he couldn't see it realized. But he had actually put up structure, and that Nelson Mandela Hospital for Children is now in existence. It's one of the top hospitals in the world for children in terms of technology, in terms of everything. Nelson Mandela Foundation has played a major role in ensuring that that hospital comes to existence. Not only that, Nelson Mandela Foundation is involved in various activities in sport, in education, and on matters relating to building of the nation. And so it's an institution which is very, very strong in that respect. And also building solidarity with various other institutions all over the world. In fact, I had a meeting with the director for Real Madrid Football Club. They want a relationship with the Nelson Mandela Foundation because also Barcelona and the football club, you'd remember that, was it last year, they went to South Africa to play there. They were kind of participating in an activity that was organized by Nelson Mandela Foundation. So there are so many activities that they are involved in building the nation and as a civil society organization and in education to take forward and the values and the legacy of Nelson Mandela, to promote and his love of humanity in general and equality and basic human rights.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm curious to know what is the mood and the role of the white community now in the country regarding policies, regarding integration, regarding respect for the black community, how things have changed, and how is the white community feeling about how the country is going and how much it is implicated in the process?
Well, I must say, Jose, that it's a wonderful opportunity. We have a wonderful country. It's a rainbow nation at peace with itself, as Nelson Mandela actually envisioned and Desmond Tutu branded. We are now a rainbow nation, fully integrated. There are individuals here and there in any society, as you would find them, even here in Europe. That is why we have now in Europe the challenges that we have of some forces that are still moving backwards. And you'd have such elements within South Africa, but we have a wonderful nation. And if you saw the rugby team that played 2 weeks back or 3 weeks back against All Blacks, and in New Zealand, All Blacks is a team that is difficult to defeat, but it was defeated by a mixed team and of South Africa, black and white, in the first team. and of Springbok, something that was not there before. But now we have a mixed, strong team. Last week we were actually walloped in Australia, and it was a mixed team. It's captained by a black player, and very strong and distinguished white and talented players under the leadership of a young African player. I'm just using that as an epitome of my country right now, and this rainbow nation. Within business is the same. And if you look within business, and you, of course, you still have remnants of the past because, and of history, and the big business still in the, and in predominantly in white hands. However, if you look at how many people now who are up there, and in fact, the second, if not the third richest person in South Africa is a black guy, and Patrice Motsepe. And I'm just citing that as examples of a gradual transformation that is taking place in creation of non-racial society. If you go to schools, they are non-racial schools. You would find here and there people that are still resisting. And it's like that in any society. There are those who are against change. And even in institutions, there will be people, if you want to introduce anything, people who do not want to accept change. But it does not mean that change is not happening. And the country, South Africa, is really moving forward. We have the issue of land now, which is a hot issue. And in South Africa, because the government is saying that land expropriation, and in fact, certain sectors or certain groupings amongst the political parties, they say expropriation of land without compensation because 80% of the land is owned by white farmers or white companies. And so people are becoming impatient. They want land. And, but be that as it may, if you go deeper to that, there's a strong debate within the ANC itself. Thabo Mbeki. If you Google, you just check for the paper on land question by Thabo Mbeki, and you go through what he says. He says you can't deal with the land without building the nation. If you actually take certain positions on the land, you must be sensitive about polarizing the nation at the same time. So land goes with the unity of the nation, and land goes with building the economy of the country, because we don't want to be populists and actually find ourselves in the same situation that other countries who took wrong positions on these matters. And however, land will be given to the people, but that will have to be done within the confines of the Constitution, not outside the Constitution. That will have to be done legally. We need the land for the people, because if you want to reduce poverty and of the people, you must give them land. We have to be patient in doing that and not be irresponsible. I'm trying to talk about the unity of my country and the creation of a non-racial society. And at the same time, there's very, very strong call for African Renaissance. When we talk about African Renaissance, we are not talking about the color of the skin of an individual. We talk about those who regard themselves as Africans, black and white, and who must take up the mantle of building that continent so that it does not become the continent and that is always carrying a begging bowl. It must come up with initiatives of creating new technologies itself and build its own economy. Thanks, José.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Bueno, creo... Vale. Y terminamos, sí.
Gracias, señor Lulama. Nosotros los africanos negros, porque cuando se habla de los africanos blancos de Sudáfrica, se nota.
Le doy las gracias por la información que nos está avanzando. Nosotros entendemos su posición como representante del gobierno sudafricano, pero algo me ha llamado la atención. Usted nos dice que la persona más rica de Sudáfrica es de raza negra. Y eso es muy bueno. Pero también le digo que las personas más pobres de Sudáfrica son negros. Y eso no me gusta tanto.
Absolutely.
Al margen de esta afirmación, yo le quería preguntar, el Congreso Nacional Africano tuvo otro grupo de Congreso Nacional del Pueblo en el que usted militó y luego pasó al Congreso Nacional Africano, ¿o estoy equivocado? Otra pregunta es, ¿qué nos puede usted contar de Winnie Mandela? ¿Y qué pasó con el proyecto de Azania? ¿Sudáfrica va a quedar así o seguiremos avanzando hasta llegar a Azania? Muchas gracias.
Well, I agree with you that definitely we have rich black people in South Africa. In fact, the current president is amongst those rich people. So there's a desire to actually pump empowerment. That's why the government introduced the policy of broad-based black economic empowerment and came up with strategies of creating and to say that any investor that comes in South Africa has to ensure that 25% of its investment and carries black people. There's no investor that gets into South Africa without abiding to that, because the government wants to pool and the poorest of the poor to be part and parcel of the investing lot. That is why you have some of black people now starting to move on their own. In fact, the person that I was referring to is just about to start a bank. And it will be the first black bank in South Africa. And now, definitely we have organizations like the PAC. I'm sure the Pan-Africanist Congress organization, and it is the one that was advocating very strongly on Africa for Africans and matters relating to the changing the name of South Africa into Azania. Strong nationalist and an organization that broke out of the ANC. You're right. But unfortunately, it became a very small organization. And it refused even to go to negotiations when we're negotiating, because they were saying that they can't sit around the same table with the oppressors. But finally, after elections and everything, they actually found themselves completely isolated, and they came back. They participated in the elections. They were represented in Parliament. They are represented by one person in Parliament as we speak. We have a big challenge of poverty. Predominantly black people are poor, you're right. And I think I referred to that. The government currently is not happy about that. And the country as a whole, both black and white, are not happy about that. That is why, and there is no resistance on the introduction of the broad-based black economic empowerment, and also ensuring that the land is distributed to people in the villages and those that can actually work the land so that there's production and people are able to live. There are various strategies that the government has actually introduced. Social security grants is given to people that are unemployed and at a certain age, including mothers and single mothers and who have children. They get grants for their children. It's not very, very few countries actually doing that. It's precisely because of recognition of poverty. And the giving out of the RDP houses free of charge By RDP, I mean Resource Development Program, and that I refer to. So we have, I agree with you, we have such serious challenges. And the situation is not going to remain like that. But we must be patient because it was plus or minus 400 years that apartheid was in existence. It's not going to disappear within 20 years. It's going to take us time. And Mandela actually taught us that. There's a long walk to freedom. And we have to move much stronger, and we need unity of the nation to actually deal with that challenge. And that is why, and they would believe very strongly in the creation of a non-racial democratic South Africa, because it cannot be one group of people and there's responsibility. It must be a non-racial nation at peace with itself, and that build the economy so that everybody is able to benefit out of the wealth that the country has. I'm not sure. Thank you. Thank you. The Winnie Mandela issue. Oh, a doyen of struggle. He's such a wonderful person. Strong leader. He's lived the family issues between himself and Nelson Mandela. In her own right, a very strong leader, dedicated, unquestionable, and contribution in the struggle, Winnie Mandela. I don't know what to say, except maybe to just be poetic when I talk about Winnie Mandela. Thank you.
Había una palabra pedida de antes. ¿Es posible o ya tenemos que...? ¿Podemos cerrar con una última pregunta que había pedido de antes? Y ya cerramos, con esto cerramos el...
Well, I want to ask you about, South Africa is a rich country in Africa and have a lot of immigration from other countries near, less rich with poverty. And what do you think about that question?
I thought if a question is supposed to be the last question, it's supposed to be an easy question. Now, this is a difficult question that is being asked. But a very interesting question because it's real. It's definitely real. That's another challenge. Obviously, we have decided not to close our borders to other people from various parts of the continent, especially because they come as economic and security asylum seekers. So it's difficult to close the borders from the people. We tried everything at the beginning, but we had to ask questions. What do we do? Because we're in Africa, and people want to survive. So it's a very difficult issue, and it's a challenge that we have accepted, and therefore there is a contestation of the resources and of the country by everybody that comes in. It's an issue that we have accepted. However, we said everybody that gets into the Republic of South Africa must abide by the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. And people's rights must be protected. At the same time, people must abide by the law and order of the country. In terms of how they survive, I think it will be the results of the economy of the country. We'll share poverty together, we'll share the riches together. Unfortunately, that's the situation that is facing South Africa today, because there are so many people and that are coming in the country, and it's difficult whether from the rest of the continent, even from Asia, people from Bangladesh, Pakistan, and they are there. We're trying our level best, and it's a very difficult because to control mobility of the people, it's very difficult because in the first place, also South Africans, ourselves, at some point during apartheid, we went out of the continent, of the country. We're hosted by Zambia, by Tanzania, by Nigeria, by Ethiopia, everywhere. And therefore, there is that consciousness amongst the people of South Africa that, and what can we do? Because it was like this with us yesterday. So it's a very difficult, that's why I was saying that if we wanted maybe strategies of how to deal with this, I don't have it, except we've just opened our hearts and said, bottom line, constitution of the country prevails to everybody, as it would prevail in any country's person. Thank you.
Lulama, muchísimas gracias por venir. Salimos de este momento de conversación con mucho más conocimiento de lo que está ocurriendo en su país, y eso nos satisface y nos enriquece muchísimo. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you very much.